Good evening, everyone. I hope you're keeping cool and hydrated in all this hot weather. Good to be with you tonight. I want to speak on something, I suppose, quite simple, but very important that you understand this. Where we're going in Emmanuel with our transition, one of the things that we're going to be highlighting more and more in the church is the phrase, every member a minister. Every member a minister. If you confirm my appointment in November at our annual general meeting, I will officially be known not as senior pastor of Emmanuel Evangelical Church, but senior minister. And Richard will be the associate minister. And you might think, well, why are we moving away from the word pastor? Well, it's because in the New Testament, nobody was called pastor this or pastor that. And you might say, why do we call somebody pastor so-and-so, but we don't call somebody prophet so-and-so or evangelist so-and-so or rabbi or teacher so-and-so? So why has the word pastor become so prominent? And there's historical reasons for that. And I'm not making a big fuss about it either, except where we're going, we want to emphasize that every member, everyone, is a minister of the gospel, a minister of Christ. Everyone is involved in the ministry, whatever fivefold or other ministry they have. So we want to focus on the idea of ministry and ministers. Ministry in church, ministry in the home, ministry in the neighborhood, ministry in the workplace. This phrase is very, very important. And we do use the phrase, don't we, ministry. But how many of us have ever thought, or perhaps we just need to be reminded of what we mean when we talk about ministry? Were people called ministers in the Bible? What there is a ministry? And so what I want to share with you this evening, briefly, is something that we will return to again and again in Emmanuel. And that is ministry and the fact that every member is a minister. And whatever God has called you to do in the church place or the marketplace, you are his minister. If you understand what a minister is, then that will help you and help us do exactly what God has called us to do together. So I'm going to share 3 words from the New Testament that are used for ministry and especially for the word minister. It is a biblical word. It is a New Testament word. It is used of men. It is used of women. Paul uses it often. In fact, he uses the word minister often. And the other word he uses a lot about ministry is workers, fellow workers. He uses that phrase a lot. Maybe we'll look at that sometime. So I'm going to share some notes, and these notes are based on some material in a book written by Colin Dye called Ministry in the Spirit. It's a great book, Ministry in the Spirit, and looks at ministry in the Old Testament, ministry in the New Testament, what ministry is in the Holy Spirit, the ministry of deliverance. It's a great book, but I've just taken a little section here to base my talk on. And what we're doing is looking at the 3 words used for ministry or minister in the New Testament as a template for us all in various capacities to be ministers. Here we go. What is ministry? Diakonos. That is the first Greek word that we're looking at together that is used in the New Testament. Remember, if you're new to the faith, that the New Testament is written in Greek. And so we like to get behind some of the English words sometimes to get to the original words to find out what they actually mean, because sometimes English words mean slightly different things to what the Greek intended them to be. So, diakonos. This is where we use the word deacons. Deacons. Do you remember the 7 deacons that were chosen in Acts chapter 6? And Stephen was one of those deacons, and Philip was one of those deacons. And this is the word. But we again, as I said, in English words, have taken this word diakonos, and if you're from a sort of religious church background, you might know people who are ordained as deacons, or they have an official title as deacons, the elders and the deacons. And although there is a sense in which a deacon has a standing in the church, the word diakonos does not mean a church official who is a deacon. It does not mean that, and we shouldn't think of it in those terms. So Paul uses this word deacon a lot. Here's an example, 2 Corinthians 3:6, who also made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the spirit. Ministers, diakonos. This is used, the apostles are called ministers, believers are called ministers, the Holy Spirit is involved in ministry, angels are ministers of fire, preachers and teachers are ministers. So it's a wonderful word that can cover many different people. It can cover the apostles right down to the believers. It covers the Holy Spirit's work. It covers angels. It covers preachers and teachers. It covers men are called ministers or deaconos, and women are called diakonos. And so what would this word mean to New Testament people? What would it mean to Paul? How is this word used in daily life? Well, diakonos is the Greek word for an ordinary private house servant. It's used to describe someone who swept the floor, who prepared food in a house, served tables, washed dishes, and so on. So this is what the word was. A diakonos was a household servant, a minister. I think of, for example, what was the calling of the 7 so-called deacons in Acts? Why were they called deacons or diakonos? Why was that normal word minister used? Well, it was used because remember what they were called to do? They were meant to be full of wisdom and full of the Holy Spirit, but they were also called to meals on wheels. They were called to take the food to the Hebrew Christian widows and the Greek-speaking Christian widows and make sure that they all got fair portions of the supply of the food, because there was a problem in getting it to these different speaking communities. So they really were diakonos. They were literally involved in making sure that widows got their needs met and everything. That was so practical. And it's wonderful to think, Pastor Peter preached on Philip on Sunday about how Philip was a minister, a diakonos, making sure all the widows, and not all the widows were old ladies, but all the widows made sure that their needs were taken care of one moment. Next thing, he's preaching the gospel in Samaria, signs and wonders. He's bringing an Ethiopian to Lord and then being translated on so you've got this wonderful picture here already of servant-hearted. And this is the big thing about the phrase minister. It means servant above all things. It doesn't mean master. It means minister. It doesn't mean to command. It means to serve. It's not a high office or a high status activity. It's rather like a low status domestic servant. And that ministry in normal Greek life would be similar to cleaning, car maintenance, cooking. And this is in stark one of Paul's favourite words for being a Christian ministry, involved in ministry. It's Christian service, and we are servants. ministers. And isn't this true that Jesus himself didn't come to be served, did he? But to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus didn't come to be ministered to, but he came to minister. Do you remember that picture of him as a servant, a diakonos, when he washed the feet of his disciples? That was a servant's thing. And he said, I'm modeling this for you. This is what you need to be. So this whole picture of diakonos, servant, has been modeled to us by Jesus, that what we do is to minister, is to serve. Everything that we do is to serve. You know, in government, we have ministers, don't we? Government ministers, the Minister of Health or the Minister of Education. Well, they may or may not know it, but they are servants. And that word comes from the word servant. They are ministers of the crown. So every minister, although appointed by the Prime Minister, and that's his name, Prime Minister, what are they ministers of? They are ministers of the crown. They are servants of the king, and they are servants of the nation. You ever heard the word public servant? I think I'd like to become a public servant. Well, all that is rooted in this word ministry, service. How different that can be sometimes in churches where people seek a leadership position. Although they might talk about serving, really they're noted by being, on a platform or set up as a pedestal, craving titles, craving to be the exception. Sometimes in certain cultures you hear the idea you've got the pastor, and then his wife is called the first lady. You ever heard that? The first lady of this church or the first lady of that church? What a load of rubbish. I mean, seriously. The first lady is, as you know, the wife of the President of the United States of America. And the most powerful political man in the world. I wonder when we have a woman president, which won't be long, whether you'll be called the first gentleman, I don't know. But anyway, so to go around calling a leader's wife the first lady, in my opinion, is totally inappropriate when Paul is using the word ministry and minister. So whatever we do in ministry, we are serving God. We're his ministers. We're ministering on his behalf, like ministers of government are meant to be, ministering on behalf of the crown to the people. So we are, whatever we do, whatever broad, our ministry is so broad. I've said the marketplace, the home place, the neighborhood place, the church place. Ministry is serving on behalf of God, others with our abilities and giftings, and brings with it the heart of a servant. So that's what ministry is. That's the most used word for minister, diakonos, that we have. And we see it used by men and women, men powerfully used, like Stephen, the first martyr, and Philip, the great evangelist. They were servants, ministers, and they were happy to serve at tables, make sure the widows got their food, and they were just as happy preaching the gospel with signs and wonders. And they didn't think that one was better than the other. They didn't think that one was better than the other. Why? Because they were servants, they were ministers. And so what we want to model increasingly, we already do this at Emmanuel, but we want to model it with correct, what I believe is correct or more correct biblical language. So I would be the senior minister. So there is a sense in which there's seniority and there's leadership, but if you're going to be first amongst anything, you should be the first amongst serving, the first amongst ministering. That's what the Bible teaches us. We know that. Richard, the associate minister, and the rest of us, ministers. And it's lovely and it's broad, and it says what we're about, but it also sort of like, it gives us weight. It was wonderful at the big Korean conference at Westminster last week, And I got to speak there, which was a real privilege. And before I spoke, I called up Cookie, Cookie, who runs our tree ministry and is on the pastoral team. I got her up and I introduced her as one of the ministers of our church, you see. And it's a beautiful phrase. It wasn't like, well, she does this. She's a minister. And she was able then to give their testimony of the area. So that's the first and most important word when we're talking about ministers or ministry. All the fivefold offices, not just pastor, but apostle, prophet, teacher, and evangelist, they are all ministers. They have different giftings, different roles. Thank God we need them all. But one thing they are all together is ministers. If you've got a great gift of business, then God has put you to be a minister of business, to be in the ministry of business. If you're in politics, God's put you there to be his minister there. We're all ministers. Let's go to the second word, which isn't quite as common as this word. This is the main word, diakonos, but is still important in our understanding of what it means to be a minister. The first word, diakonos, from where we get deacon, which we have religified it too much, simply means servant and servant of the gospel. But here's the second word, and it's not used as much. It's used occasionally, but nevertheless, it means a minister, a minister. And the Greek word here is liturgos, okay, from which we get the word liturgy. Have you ever heard the phrase liturgy? This is the Anglican liturgy. This is the Methodist liturgy. And liturgy is basically the substance of what, on components of what creates a service, a particular service. Well, what does liturgos, from which it comes from, what does that mean? Well, here's an example of Paul using it in Romans 15:16. And he said that I might be a minister of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, ministering the gospel of God. Now, you might think, that means he's a servant, a diakonos of Jesus, ministering to the Gentiles. He's diaconing, he's serving. But the word isn't that. It may say minister in the English, but the word is liturgos. And so what is he saying here? Well, liturgos means a minister, but it carries a completely different meaning to diakonos. Liturgos is the Greek word for an important public servant. So now we go back to what I said about ministers of the crown, ministers of different departments of government, public office, public servants. And in those days, they would often carry out this public political office at their own expense. And here's some more examples. We don't need to go into them, but we have Christ as a minister, a liturgos, Paul, Epaphroditus, prophets and teachers. The duty of the Gentile churches is to minister, like public service to poor Jewish believers, the practical response of believers towards one another. So this word liturgos is high status, whereas we've been looking at low status. And in these notes, it talks about that often high status dominates Christian thinking about ministry. But this tells us that what we do, even if we are very given great authority and great prominence as a minister of Christ within the church or the marketplace or in politics or in whatever field God has called us to minister, even if we do that, we're not doing it for our own benefit. Remember, this was a public servant who did it for the sake of the public, would usually fund themselves. It was they used their ability, their power, their high status in order to minister and serve the people around them. So I quite like that. We got the main word for ministry, which is diakonos, which is the household servant, and that is what Paul calls from apostles himself, women, men, right down to the newest believer. We're ministers of the gospel. But here also, we will move in roles where we are a minister, like he's a minister of Jesus to the Gentiles, where it's more of we're carrying something. It's like we're an ambassador for God, and we're doing it at our own expense. And if we do have a public office, if we do have public prominence, if we are high up in leadership, or if we're high up in the company, then yeah, we should be ministers and servants, but also we should be using what power, authority, or resources we have for the public good and the good of the gospel. So those are the first two. And the final one tonight is huperetes, huperators. Huper meaning under, rates meaning rower. This literally means under rower, under rower. And so here is an example of it in Acts 26:16. But rise and stand on your feet. This is speaking to Paul. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister, not a servant, diakonos, he is, not a liturgos, could have been used, but the third word, huperetes, and a witness, both the things you've seen and the things I will reveal to you. And so this can be translated minister and under rower. And so this word under rower, it gives the picture, huperetes, of these rowers on these big ships. Do you remember? Not all rowers on these big ships were slaves. Soldiers used to row their own ships. But it was the idea that these rowers were under the authority of the captain and the captain's sort of like main crew. They were under rowers. So the key thing on this third word, huperetes, is that you are under the direction of another. And it was popularly used at the time for a subordinate or someone who acted under the direction of another person. So the synagogue attendant, there in Luke chapter 4, verse 20, there's a classic. The synagogue attendant is acting on behalf of someone. And so this carries with it the idea of like being an ambassador, going on behalf of somebody. If you have an ambassador to a nation, that ambassador to the nation doesn't represent himself, does he? Or his own opinions. He's not the king or the president of that nation. No, that ambassador is an under rower. He comes as a representative of the government that sent him. And so this word means that we are not mavericks by ourselves, but we function under authority. Function under authority, under the leadership, direction of Christ and those around us. So we have these three words that sum up what it is, very briefly, to be a minister and to be in ministry. A word we're going to become more and more familiar with in Emmanuel as we go forward, as I will be the senior minister, if you vote me in, Richard the associate minister, and one of the phrases that we'll unpackage is every member a minister. It means, number one, we will all aspire to be servants and to serve others and to use whatever we have for the benefit of others and the kingdom. We will also strive to be liturgious. We'll try to carry the dignity of public service to others in whatever role or status we may have in the world or in the church. We know that we are doing this for others. It's for our own expense. It's our own expense. We're doing it sacrificially. And then thirdly, we're under rowers. We're under Jesus's authority. We're doing it his way. And we recognize mutual authority and authority, spiritual authority, not in a terrible way, but in a wonderful way. And these three aspects of ministry and being a minister will release us into greater spheres of ministry. We won't be, not that you were, but there won't be any danger of us simply thinking that's the pastor's job and forgetting about the rest of the fivefold, or forgetting about the business people, or the people working in schools, or the people working in medicine, or education. Well, I said education, whatever these things, but we'll all be saying we're all ministers. We all have a ministry. We all need to reflect these three terms. And although we may have a senior minister, an associate minister, we are all ministers. What's my ministry? What's my service? How do we minister together? I know it's simple teaching, but it's going to be very important for us to grasp this, because this is the model and the template for the ministry of our church in the months and years to come. Thank you, Richard.